Shortage of donkey meat in China, and countries around the world have been stockpiling food for a couple of years, and the ones that have been are really glad that they are, because there's also a shortage of fertilizer that's coming out of the war in the Middle East. And this is actually what's happening, where we get away from breaking news and we talk about big global trends and topics. And today we're talking about global food systems. Because so much of global fertilizer actually originates in the Middle East, it is causing a global spike in food prices. But actually, countries were stockpiling food before this war broke out. It actually started during the pandemic. It makes you wish that you had some prophet to come to you and be like, if my life were important, I would ask, should I live or die? But I know the answer's a lie, far from this world. Paris Times, syndicated across the Financial Times, is also indicating that countries have been getting a little more isolationist since the pandemic. And the global food supply chain started to feel a little more fragile. And then again, when Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, many countries, particularly starting with the Nordic countries, which are closer to the border with Russia, started stockpiling food. Now countries across the world, including the Nordic countries and also Brazil and China and India, are stockpiling food. And that, plus this global fertilizer increase in price, could make it so that food prices globally spike. And I think you can learn about the way that the fertilizer spike is happening in lots of other places. Two things I don't see covered as much. One is that it's not good timing for this to happen, because a lot of places across the globe are planting their crops right now. And actually in the US, farmers are particularly upset about this because they have to order fertilizer now, right? In order to plant their crops, primarily in March, April, May, in order to have a good harvest. And a lot of states, especially Trump states, are upset with the Trump administration because of that. And I thought this New York Times article where they interviewed Liz Smith is a strategist, but she's the one who sort of brought Pete Buttigieg into the national eye, in my opinion. I mean, Mayor Pete's a great candidate, but also she was running his campaign way back when he was running out of South Bend. And she talked about in this New York Times article how farmers in Iowa are giving an opening to Democrats, in part because of these food price spikes and also because of the tariffs, right? And so I think that could be a silver lining. On the downside, the U.S. is taking away sanctions from places like Belarus, which has had sanctions on it for a while, in order to lower fertilizer prices. And so, pros and cons there. The big con is that a lot of people are going to go hungry because of this, because supplies of food will also run short. And as all that's happening, there's a big debate happening around the world about GMOs and how best to incorporate them into the food system. Here in the US, there have been a bunch of articles over the last few months about how different states are passing different laws about ultra-processed foods and GMOs and things like that. And because there's this kind of unusual connection point between far-right MAHA people and sort of the crunchy left, there actually is an interesting way to pass some laws, I think, to get rid of maybe some chemicals that actually aren't good for us. But there are some really interesting things that seem like they could be good for the world in terms of GMOs. This article about new fruits that could be coming through, I think are really interesting. To have a pitless cherry does seem kind of great and probably doesn't provide the same level of danger as red dye number 5 or whatever. So I'm hopeful that some of those things can work. This DevX article that talks about how fortified rice can help feed hungry people around the world and give them more nutrients is, I think, really interesting too. And they do that in a few ways. One way is they've sort of ground up other nutrients and put it in with the rice, but they also do some GMO stuff on some of that rice. And that could be a really good thing. And that's important because famine is spreading across the world. And I talked in our last Water Wars episode about how northern Kenya and Somalia are on the brink of facing a famine. Of course, Sudan has one of the worst famines we've seen in history, and that continues as that conflict drags on. Gaza continues to sort of be on the brink, specifically now as war continues in the Middle East. And Lebanon is also really needing a lot of food supplies at this moment. I have been interested to see a couple articles in Foreign Policy and Foreign Affairs about the way that food is also weaponized, similar to how we've been talking about water. And there's been a lot of talk, particularly with Iran and also Cuba, and the way the U.S. is trying to provide sanctions and take away a lot of resources in order to weaken the ruling regime, right? To ideally have people rise up. And I thought this article about Cuba was really important for us to talk about in that way, because they basically say well, if you starve the whole population, that population will not be strong enough to rise up, right? At a certain point, they're going to be really focused on just surviving day to day, and they'll be both physically and sort of spiritually weak because they will be beat down by not having any food. And so not only is it like an immoral choice to starve a population in any way at any time, in my opinion, it also is not strategic if your goal is to bring down a regime. And I thought that was like kind of important to bring up. Yeah. At the same time as we are starving out some countries, as the US, we also have cut funding from feeding other countries. And this article about Afghanistan I thought was really just awful, where when the US pulled out of Afghanistan in 2019, we made a commitment basically that like, hey, we're going to still try to provide aid, and like we want to make sure like we're here for regular Afghan people and all that stuff, right? But it turns out when we shut down USAID, we just said no thanks. And then when we've added the small amount of funding back into USAID type programs again this last year, we basically said, yeah, we'll fund some things, but we're not going to fund anything in Afghanistan or Yemen because they're our enemies, essentially. And what that means is, according to this DevX article, like quite a lot of people are going to not survive the winter in the mountains. And they're waiting for the snow to melt to see how many people died. And that is truly awful. Like, truly, we just don't care about anyone anymore. And that doesn't feel good. Genetic modification does impact other industries that I'd never thought of before. And that's where the China goat story comes in, where it's not goats, though. It's donkeys. Oh, fuck. Goats and donkeys. I've eaten a lot of goat in my life. I don't really believe in, like, I think a lot of people would be like, ugh, donkey meat, why would you eat that and stuff? And I don't know, if it's part of like the tradition and the culture of a place to eat a thing, they probably found a way to make it taste like pretty good. And I would totally try it if I was there. And it is like a normal part of the diet in northern China. But I was interested to know, like, not just like why are they eating donkey meat, but also, which like, it's probably kind of stringy though, right? But I bet lots of other things are also stringy and we still eat them, so. But I was curious to know, like, why is it that the donkey meat is, like, in short supply, and also where is it coming from if not in China? And it turns out part of the reason is because donkeys are not being genetically modified because they, like, in terms of capitalism, can't compete with other meat sources like cows, where, like, cows can get to the place where you can slaughter them and eat them faster than donkeys, and they provide like the ROIs better on a cow. And so that's partly why we're running out of donkey meat, which is kind of wild to see that like China is beginning to import some donkey meat, and the countries will surprise you where it's coming from. It's coming from Mongolia, which did not surprise me, but also from Brazil, which I thought was like not a place I was expecting, and also Uruguay. And the other thing in China that I thought was really interesting is that there is new data that has come out that shows the percentage of money people are spending in China on food and how that relates to their total household income. And that is a measure that a lot of economists use to try to understand like the purchasing power of regular people. And there's like a famous German economist who like coined that as like a way to measure like, hey, is your economy really improving for everybody? Well, if so, then probably the amount of money every month that somebody is spending on food should be going down in relation to everything else that they spend money on, because they have hypothetically more disposable income if their lives are getting better in a financial way, right? And actually in China, it's looking like the amount of money that people are spending on food is still pretty high as a proportion of what they're spending. And so that shows that maybe their economy isn't improving for everybody as much as they're trying to sort of like put out into the world. But I loved in this article though, they interview this woman who is like talking about how much of her budget is being spent on food. And she just keeps saying things like, well, I spend a lot of my money on food because food is what I care about. Food's what brings me pleasure and joy in life. And of course I spend all my money on food. And throughout the article, they're trying to like make a point that like Chinese people are spending more money on food like than the like government is saying in terms of the economics. But this woman is, I think, an outlier. I mean, I super identify with her because she's like, throughout the article, they keep quoting her and she just keeps being like, well, I mean, sure, like I spend all my money going out to really nice restaurants and eating them all, and my food budget's really high, and I eat everything I can possibly find because I just love food and I love good food and I want to pay for it. And it's like, I mean, maybe that's everybody. That's definitely me. If you follow this channel, that's probably YouTube. I was just like, I don't think you're finding a representative sample here, of like the Chinese economy. But this person, whoever you are, person quoted in The Economist, please reach out to us. We want to hear from you, hear it actually what's happening. Tell us all the food that you're eating. Is it donkey meat? Is it something else? Like, we truly want to know. And also, I would like to see whatever your blog is about all the food you're eating, because you seem very passionate and you seem committed to the cause of finding the best food around the world. That's what's happening in food this month. What did I miss? What should I be looking into next?